Imagine the morning of December 31st, 2000. Most of the world was shaking off a hangover or looking forward to the first true new year of the new millennium. In the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Setagaya, Tokyo, the streets were lined with the kind of homes you'd see in a magazine: clean, modern, and safe. But inside one of those houses, at number 3-23-26, time hadn't just slowed down. It had stopped. When Yasuko Miyazawa's mother walked next door that morning, she expected to see her daughter, her son-in-law, Mikio, and her two grandkids, Nina and Ray, getting ready for the holiday. She had a key, so she didn't wait for an answer at the door. What she walked into wasn't a home anymore. It was a site where a tragedy of incomprehensible proportions had unfolded. But it wasn't just the fact that 4 lives had been taken that makes this case one of the most haunting mysteries in modern history. It was what happened after the incident. The individual responsible didn't just finish what they started and vanish into the night. They stayed. For at least 10 hours, while the rest of the neighborhood slept, this person made themselves at home. They went into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and helped themselves to 4 containers of ice cream and some melon. They didn't use a spoon. They just squeezed the containers to eat. They even sat down at the family's computer. At 1:18 a.m. and again at 10 a.m., they browsed the internet, even trying to book tickets for a movie. Think about that for a second. While the remains of a family were just feet away, this person was casually surfing the web and snacking. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about a ghost who walked among the living. The subject left behind a literal wardrobe of evidence. They left their sweater, their scarf, their hat, their gloves, and even the tool they used, just lying there. It's as if they wanted to be known, yet they remained a shadow. The sheer scale of the response to this was massive. We're talking about an investigation that involved over 280,000 police officers over the years. To put that in perspective, that's enough people to fill a major professional football stadium nearly 4 times over. They collected over 12,000 pieces of evidence. They had the subject's DNA, their fingerprints, and even their unique physical traces. On paper, this is a case that should have been solved in 48 hours. But as investigators started peeling back the layers, the details didn't lead to a suspect. They led to a series of impossible questions. They found sand in the pockets of the clothing left behind, sand that didn't come from Japan. Forensic analysis traced those tiny grains back to a specific area in California. How does an individual with ties to the American West Coast end up in a quiet Tokyo suburb, leaving a trail of DNA that suggests a mixed heritage rarely seen in the region at that time? The psychology here is what keeps investigators up at night. Most people who commit such an act are driven by a hit-and-run mentality, adrenaline, fear, the desperate need to escape. This individual had the opposite. They had a stay-and-occupy mentality. They used the family's first aid kit to patch themselves up, using clear tape to wrap their own injuries. They were so comfortable that they even used the bathroom and left behind evidence there too. It's a level of coldness that defies standard criminal profiling. It suggests someone who didn't see their victims as people, but as obstacles to be cleared so they could enjoy a quiet night in a nice house. But as the sun rose on New Year's Eve, the subject finally decided to leave, disappearing into the crisp winter air of Tokyo. They left behind a house full of silent witnesses, objects that tell a story but can't speak a name. And as the police began to look closer at the items left behind, they realized that the most chilling piece of evidence wasn't what was taken from the house. It was something the subject brought with them, something that suggested this wasn't their first time in a place like this, and it wouldn't be their last. What was it about that sweater and that specific brand of shoes that pointed to a life lived thousands of miles away? The answers were hiding in the fibers, but the more the police learned, the more they realized they weren't looking for a local resident. They were looking for a traveler with a very dark itinerary. The answers were hiding in the fibers, but the more the police learned, the more they realized they weren't looking for a local resident. They were looking for a traveler with a very dark itinerary. The most unsettling part isn't the tragedy itself, but what happened afterward. Most people, if they've done something terrible, they run. They want to put as much distance between themselves and the scene as possible. But this individual, they did the opposite. They stayed. For nearly 10 hours, this person made themselves at home while the family lay still in the other rooms. Think about that. While the house was silent, the person responsible opened the fridge. They found some small containers of ice cream, the kind you'd give to a kid, and ate 4 of them. They didn't even use a spoon. They just squeezed the containers to get the ice cream out. They even found some melon and finished that off too. It's that mundane, everyday action, having a snack, juxtaposed against the horror of the night that makes your skin crawl. But they weren't just eating, they were browsing. At around 10:18 p.m., the family's desktop computer hummed to life. Someone sat in Mikio's chair and started surfing the web. They visited the website of the company Mikio worked for. They even tried to buy tickets to a theater performance. They were in the house for hours, just clicking through links. Then, the computer was used again at 10 o'clock the next morning. 10 hours. That's longer than a standard work shift. When the person finally decided to leave, they didn't just walk out. They left behind a complete set of clothes, neatly folded. A sweatshirt, a scarf, a hat. It was like they were shedding a skin. And this is where the mystery stops being a local tragedy and starts becoming an international puzzle. The shoes they left behind were Slazenger sneakers. Now, size 28, which is about a size 11 in the US, is pretty rare in Japan. But more importantly, that specific model was never even sold in Japan. They were manufactured in South Korea and sold primarily in the UK and other parts of Asia. Then, the investigators looked closer at the pockets of that discarded sweatshirt. Inside, they found microscopic grains of sand. When they put that sand under a microscope, they realized it didn't come from a Tokyo park or a Japanese beach. It was a very specific type of crushed quartz, the kind you only find in one place, the area around the Mojave Desert, specifically near Edwards Air Force Base in California. Suddenly, the profile of the person they were looking for shifted. We're no longer talking about a neighbor with a grudge. We're looking at someone who had recently walked through the American Southwest. And the DNA? That was the real kicker. When the labs finished their analysis, the results were a massive curveball. The individual wasn't 100% Japanese. Their mother's lineage pointed towards Southern Europe, maybe the Mediterranean area, while the father's side was East Asian. In a country as ethnically homogeneous as Japan is in 2000, this should have been a massive lead. A mixed-race individual with connections to California and a very specific taste in foreign footwear. With all that, the DNA, the fingerprints, the literal sand from another continent, you'd think an arrest was only days away. The police had a mountain of evidence. They eventually had over 280,000 officers assigned to the case over the years. To put that in perspective, that's enough people to fill nearly 4 massive professional football stadiums. But as the days turned into weeks, a terrifying realization began to sink in. They had the ghost's clothes. They had his DNA. They even knew where he had been traveling. But every time they reached out to grab him, their hands passed right through. Because while the forensic evidence pointed to a man who existed in the physical world, the digital trail he left behind suggested something much more impossible. The computer that was used at 10 a.m. the morning after the incident? The investigators found something about that final login that didn't just defy logic. It suggested that the person they were hunting might have been in two places at once. That 10 a.m. login was the ultimate digital ghost. At that hour, a family member was already on their way to the house to check on the Miyazawas. But inside, someone was clicking on a mouse, trying to access a theater website to buy movie tickets. For a long time, the police couldn't wrap their heads around it. Was the subject still there, casually browsing the web while the morning sun hit the windows? Or was it a technical glitch? The investigation eventually landed on a theory that's almost more disturbing than the alternative. The mouse had been moved, yes, but there was no further activity after those few minutes. Some believe the individual had simply stayed the night, treated the home like his own, and finally decided to leave just as the rest of the world was waking up. But he didn't just leave behind a digital footprint. He left a physical autobiography. The subject didn't just stay for the computer. He treated the Miyazawa's kitchen like a late-night diner. He helped himself to 4 containers of melon-flavored ice cream. He didn't use a spoon. He squeezed the containers to eat it. He ate a melon. He drank barley tea. He even used the family's first aid kit to treat a wound on his own hand, neatly folding the discarded bandages and leaving them behind. It's this level of casual entitlement that keeps profilers up at night. He wasn't just a shadow in the corner. He was a guest who refused to leave. Then came the DNA results, and this is where the case turns into a global puzzle. The physical traces left at the scene, the skin cells and other evidence, told a story of a very specific heritage. The DNA showed that the individual's mother was likely of Southern European or Mediterranean descent, while his father was East Asian. In a country like Japan, where the population is famously uniform, a person with this specific genetic map should have stood out like a neon sign. Yet, when they ran the profile against every database they had, they got nothing but silence. And it wasn't just his DNA that had traveled. Inside the pockets of the sweatshirt he left behind, investigators found microscopic grains of sand. This wasn't just any sand. Forensic geologists traced it back to a very specific area, the Mojave Desert in California, specifically near a flight test center. Think about that for a second. This person had been in the American Southwest, perhaps at a skate park or a military base, before bringing those tiny grains of Nevada dust into a quiet bedroom in Setagaya. The scale of the investigation that followed is almost impossible to visualize. We're talking about 280,000 officers over more than 2 decades. They've followed over 16,000 leads. To put that in perspective, that's like the entire police force of a major metropolitan city spending their entire careers on one single family. They even kept the reward at 20 million yen, which is roughly $130,000, one of the highest amounts ever offered in the country's history. But as the years turned into decades, the house at the end of the road became a monument to frustration. In Japan, there used to be a 15-year statute of limitations for these types of incidents. But because of the Miyazawa family, the Japanese government actually changed the law in 2010, abolishing the time limit entirely. They refused to let this person win just by waiting out the clock. Today, the Miyazawa home is still there. It's wrapped in a protective shell to keep the evidence from degrading, but the frame remains. The grandmother, who is now in her 90s, has spent every year since the tragedy demanding an answer that never comes. The individual responsible would be in his 40s or 50s today. He might be in Europe, he might be in the States, or he might be sitting in a small apartment just a few miles from Setagaya, scrolling through the same news articles we are. He left his clothes, his DNA, his fingerprints, and even his signature on the family computer. He gave the world everything except his name. And until that name is found, the story of the family at the edge of the park remains a haunting reminder that sometimes the most terrifying predators don't hide in the dark. They make themselves at home in the light of your own living room.